everyone, and welcome to another episode of Out of the Fog. I am your host, Laurabel. I'd like you to take a minute and imagine a world where all genders were equal, where diversity and equity reigned supreme, where we didn't judge each other based on our differences, but instead celebrated them. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to the theme of this year's International Women's Day, Break the Bias. We'll be sitting down with Minister Pam Parsons, who is the Minister of Women's and Gender Equality, and we'll be having an in-depth conversation about her ministry, her department, and what breaking the bias looks like in our province.
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
Calling all journalism students, Omni Television is once again awarding scholarships to qualified students pursuing a career in third language journalism.
I am very grateful to be one of the recipients of the Omni TV Scholarship. This scholarship gave me hope. It made me see that there is space for people like me in the media industry.
Omni is home to a variety of locally produced current affairs programs and daily national newscasts, broadcast in 6 languages. To learn more about Omni scholarships, visit omnitv.ca/scholarships.
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
And we're back with Pam Parsons, Minister of Women's and Gender Equality. Minister, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's glad to have you on the couch with us. So we want to know a little bit more about you and how you got your start in politics and what inspired you to run.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here. And it's a bit sentimental for me to be here at Rogers. Actually, back before I entered politics, I was a journalist and producer for Rogers TV Out of the Fog. So it's a bit of a reunion to be here today. So it's awesome. But yeah, I guess my interest in politics sparked way back when I was a child. I was actually a young child. Actually, I think it's grade 5.
Wow.
A family friend was seeking a political nomination for provincial politics, actually from the town of Harbour Grace. Okay. And my family were never political, my mom and dad, but of course this was a family friend, so they got involved to support their family friend, and I was just so amazed at it. And I mean, I was at a young age, and I could just, I remember saying to my father at one time, Dad, how can you're not in politics? But, and so from then on, I mean, I was always intrigued, of course, with world issues, community matters on the ground, provincial matters, but in particular international. And so it's just something that I've always been interested in, even through my high school career. Following high school, I did my degree in political science at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. And of course, typically when students go to university, they bump around from major to major. And I actually originally went away to study child youth family services.
Oh, wow.
But I quickly realized that that wasn't going to be for me. And so I tried a few different courses. And I remember, I'll never forget my very first political science class. When I was there, it was actually Dr. Peter McKenna was the professor, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm home. This is it. This is where I want to be. And so, of course, that's what I majored in with a minor in history, and I loved it. And even then, following my university, I also have an interest in broadcast and, of course, in news. So following my university degree, I went in to study broadcast journalism at King's Tech at NSCC, which is in the Annapolis Valley. So I did all my post-secondary pretty much in Nova Scotia, the neighboring, of course, beautiful province in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia, my second home. And that was amazing as well. I loved it. And it, of course, is all about current affairs, which also covers politics.
Yeah.
And all the time, at all levels, the local level, municipal level, provincial, as well as the national, the federal level. And even though I knew I was going to go into this, and my parents, I remember them saying to me, you sure you want to do this? Because, it's a saturated market, media, as you know.
Yeah.
It's competitive and it's small, ultimately. And I said, no, I really want to do this. And I went for it. And so I did, and it was amazing. The Radio Television Arts program gave me opportunity to have wonderful work term experiences. My first one I did actually was with CBC in Halifax, CBC Television. And I loved it, and I was so thrilled. As an intern, they put me on air up there, and my professors were really proud of me for that. And of course, and also I worked at the local radio station in the Valley, in the Annapolis Valley, when I was there for AVR and my summer jobs, and I was a summer cruiser girl as well. So I did the summer cruiser gig, and then when school started, they put me in the newsroom as the weekend news editor reporter. So I loved it. And it didn't feel like work. I mean, university was fun, and I love it, but it was more academically focused, whereas the college perspective, it was hands-on learning, in the industry, and I got a lot of A's, which I can't necessarily say the same. I did well in university, but not as much, college was just great, and I loved it, and it didn't feel like work. And so I just went on to do that. As I said, I studied in Nova Scotia, loved Nova Scotia, and at the time when I first went away, I was only 19 years old, and I thought I'm never going to come back to Newfoundland. I just want to, continue on. But oddly enough, when I finished my 2 programs, I got that gravitational pull. I wanted to come back home to Newfoundland, Labrador, to take my skills and everything I've learned and to utilize them at home and be close to my family. And so that's what I did. I was fortunate enough to get hired for Here and Now, CBC, as a summer relief student upon graduation. And I loved it. It was amazing. It was great. And I worked with CBC for a couple of years on a casual basis with television and CBC radio. And it was in the old Duckworth building down in Duckworth in downtown before they actually closed that. So that was historic as well. And I'll never forget the mentorship and the people who reached out and helped me along the way and who allowed me to learn from them and, who took the time to, show me some tricks of the trade and give me some good solid advice that I'll take with me forever. And I'll be forever grateful, to those people who took the time to do that. So I spent some time in industry. Following CBC, I was offered a position, as I said, at Out of the Fog here in St. John's, and that was a great opportunity as well, where I was a producer and did some on-air work as well, reporting on-air, and I've got to do some creative fun stories there. And during that time, I was offered a position at Rogers TV in Owen Sound, Ontario.
Wow.
So I felt it in my heart. It was time to, get out and get some more experiences, which mean I left Newfoundland, Labrador again, but of course with the intent of always coming back. So I took the initiative to getting some meetings and of course making myself known here in the local broadcast industry. I'll never forget I had a meeting over at NTV, and before I went and I arranged it and had a tour and said, I want to come back here. I'd like to come back here, when I get my experience. So I kept in touch. Actually, Fred Hutton was the news director at the time. And the whole time I was away in Ontario, I was there for only about 6 months, and it was a great experience where I was actually responsible for producing my own show called First Local News for Grey County, Ontario. And again, I also maintained the on-air presence and doing reports. And, but of course, I still kept in touch. I still felt, I'm Newfoundland, Labrador is always home. Even though living in Ontario and keeping up with the Ontario news and learning the lay of the law up there, of course, and on the ground, I still found myself listening to, CBC radio at home here. While I was away, I would always tune in and keep up on the news, of course, back here in my home province. And then while I was away, I was offered an opportunity to come back to NTV, and that's what I did. I left my parents, my dad, and I wouldn't be where I am without the support of my parents. They packed me up and they moved me to Ontario, and then
6 months later,
called home Dad. So it came up, and of course we packed me up and we moved back down. And I came back then to work for NTV, and I was there for several years and permanent, and I really enjoyed it. And being on the ground, and of course I did everything. I trained as a broadcast journalist where I did the shooting, editing, as well as the writing and the reporting, which I really think helped me significantly when I was going to make my merge into political life, because it's risky. I was actually approached in 2011 by a party to run at that time, but I had just fairly new at NTV, and I would have had to leave my job and then, of course, go into politics and in journalism and in broadcast. You can't simply make your way back if you're not successful to come back to your job in news, because as you know, it's news is neutral and there's no political affiliation, obviously. So I wasn't quite ready, but again, it was in my heart, and then I really got thinking about it again. I knew this was something I wanted to do. And so one day, it was during the Liberal leadership, among all that hype, was around 2013, and I kind of took the plunge, and I went in then, and I was hired to work on the Liberal leadership campaign. Okay. And I did that, and I stayed with it, worked on by-elections following that, and then when the timing came, I announced I was going to seek my own nomination.
Oh, wow.
And at that time, of course, I have been living away from my hometown, which is I grew up in Spaniards Bay, in Conception Bay North, is where I'm from. But again, with my work, my education took me out of province, and then when I came home, I lived in St. John's, of course, while working in journalism. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 districts actually I was thinking about, but I had to go with the one, of course, where I grew up, where I could literally go in a community, knock on a door, and know who the people are and literally go in and have a cup of tea and have a chat. And so that was back in when was that? That was a while ago now. It feels like a lifetime. But following 2013, that's my candidacy, and I was elected to the House of Assembly in 2015, and I represent the district of Harbour Grace, Portagrave, and I couldn't be happier. I'm really, really grateful, to be the MHA, of course, for the people of my hometown and Conception Bay North region.
Well, that's fantastic. So this year for International Women's Day, the theme is Break the Bias.
Yes.
So people, when they typically think of politics, they think of it as a very male-dominated industry and sector. So how has breaking the biases, being a woman in politics, now being the Minister of Women and Gender Equality, how have you fought against biases, and what has that been like for you?
Well, you're right. It is certainly a male-dominated profession, as are many, and it still is today. But we are certainly seeing headway. And I'm actually the first woman to represent the district. It used to be called Portagrave, but it's Harbour Grace Portagrave. And the nomination process itself was hotly contested. There were 6 candidates, and there were only 2 women. Wow. I was one of them. And thankfully, I became the candidate. But yes, absolutely. I mean, you look in the House of Assembly now, I mean, there's 40 seats. There are 40 districts, and I think it's only 9 or 10 that are represented by women. But I am happy to say we are making progress. I mean, our Premier Fury increased the number of women in cabinet from this cabinet now. And of course, I'm one of them. I'm honoured to be appointed to serve as Minister for Women and Gender Equality. And I'm also happy to say that the Premier is, he changed the mandate. He made it a standalone portfolio because it used to be the status of women, and now it's called Women and Gender Equality. And of course, that encompasses a whole array of different, also gender diverse individuals are taken, into that mandate. So we've made progress, but of course, like anything, there's still a lot more to do.
So we talked about the name change when Premier Fury got into power, and how it used to be the status of women, and now it's the Ministry for Women and Gender Equality. What does that name change mean to you?
Well, it changes the mandate completely, and even when I'm speaking and visiting stakeholders, community stakeholders, you have to be conscious in saying it's not simply just the status of women. Yes, we're doing everything that we can to advance the status of women, but also gender diverse individuals. And we know how important it is to support gender diverse individuals. One group that comes to mind, and I want to commend them, is Quadrangle. And they're an amazing group, and I've met with them, and I'm also working with my colleague, the Minister for Children, Senior Social Development, to help them with some initiatives that they're bringing forward. And it's just fun, and it's really important to represent and to work with and to look like what your society looks like. It's important for society to be able to look at their government and see themselves reflected, and to see themselves represented, because that's the reality of the world that we live in. And it's been an absolute honor. Years ago, as you know, and as many of us would know, 2S LGBTQIA+, no one, you said that 10 years ago, you wouldn't know. Sure. That definition certainly has expanded to be inclusive. And it wasn't really topics that we talked about lesbian, gay, bisexual topics. They weren't talked about when I was growing up in school. But now, that's a bias in itself that has been broken. And again, there's still work to do, but it's very important, and I'm just honored to be in the role that I am to help stakeholders. And I look at it as a team. I mean, we're all a big team here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I think that we owe it to our residents and to ourselves to be the most inclusive that we can be, and to do what we can, to make this place the best place to live. And you know what? I think we're up there. I mean, I'm very proud to be in Newfoundland and Labrador, and especially what we see happening in the world. I mean, I'd be remiss now if I didn't speak about what's happening in Ukraine, and my heart goes out to them. And of course, we have to stand up as a global community. I'm really proud of the stance that the Premier has taken, and as well as our Prime Minister. And we have to do what we have to do to stand up and protect each other. Everybody deserves to live and grow and learn and play in a safe environment, and to feel safe and to feel comfortable and feel at home.
So we talked a little bit about how your ministry and your department kind of deals with not only women's issues, but the issues of gender diverse individuals. If people are wondering what exactly that looks like, can you explain to people what that looks like in your ministry? Well,
transgendered is a very important topic that we're hearing about. I'm happy to say that since we've taken government in 2015, significant legislative changes have been made with regards to birth certificates, non-binary, and it's important, to reflect those changes and to do what we can. And the feedback that we're getting from community is good. And I mean, for example, I can't speak from that, those experiences personally, but people who felt that, they were born in the wrong body. I certainly respect it and appreciate it, and I'm happy to say our government supports those initiatives, and with the changes that we're making now, that they have that right to make those changes and to be supported by their government.
No, that's fantastic, and that's very
And that's
true.
just one change, yeah.
No, it's very true. I know a lot of people who are in the community who are very excited when that change did happen. So it was something they were very proud to see happen within our province, especially.
Absolutely. I mean, we're a leader in that regard. But I love that. I mean, and we see the same reflected, on a national stage. I'm really happy with the Prime Minister's view on social rights and even feminist rights. So it's really progressive, and it's a breath of fresh air, really.
That's great. And we'll take a break, and we'll be right back.
It all started when I racked up some serious debt. Interest payments were going up, creditors were calling. Janes and Noseworthy came up with a plan. Knowing that the phone was going to stop ringing and that I was not in this alone was a huge relief. Bankruptcy or a consumer proposal or whatever help you get is not the end. It's just the beginning. A chance to start again with knowledge and support and people in your corner. Are you ready? Get out of debt. It's okay.
Learn more about Leah's story at janesnoseworthy.ca.
It was our 35th anniversary. To celebrate, we were on our way to Mama Rosie's, where we had our first date. That's when we heard coming from the radio. So we stopped and listened. It helped us get to safety. So when I think of our anniversary, because now we have even more to celebrate.
And we're back with Minister Pam Parsons, Minister of Women's and Gender Equality, and we're having a great conversation. Minister?
Yeah. Hi, it's great to be back.
So when we talk about women's issues and gender diverse people's issues, we also need to talk about gender-based violence. And what is your ministry doing when it comes to that?
Well, you know what? Gender-based violence, unfortunately, I appreciate it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's a comfortable topic and very sensitive for a lot of people, especially family members who have lost people to gender-based violence. But the unfortunate fact is we need to continue having this conversation until we don't need to have that conversation. And so, again, that's my department. We work with over 15 organizations here province-wide, gender-based violence prevention organizations and women equality-seeking organizations. So we do a lot. We do a lot of great work, and I want to commend community because they're the experts. I mean, I'm the minister. Like I said, I'm honored to be in this role and to be appointed to work with community. But my heart goes out to the people who are on the front lines who provide these services to the people who need them most, the victims, and who we know ultimately, for the most part, are women. So we do provide like operational funding to different groups, and of course they're doing the work on the ground. Like COVID, for example, we saw the need, the gender gap, the gender wage gap, even in violence. I mean, and what we have done as a response. One thing, think about it. We're living through a pandemic. It's unprecedented for our time. Mm-hmm. And we will go through these lockdown periods. Well, think about someone who is experiencing domestic violence with their partner, their intimate partner violence. And during the lockdown times, they can't get out and go to their day job, to physically go to work or to go wherever to get out of the house. And so in some situations, they're stuck with their attacker. And so that, can you imagine, the terror? And I mean, I guess you wouldn't be able to appreciate that unless you were experiencing that. But as a response to that, our government, my department, in conjunction with the Department of Children, Senior, Social Development, we work closely with many departments. As a response, though, we created what's called the Domestic Violence Helpline, and also working in partner with the Transition House Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. And what that is, it's a free number that's province-wide available from Newfoundland to Labrador across our province, where people can call if they're experiencing violence, extreme situations, a crisis. They can call that number and get help immediately. And that call, like I said, it's province-wide. It's a 1-800 number. It's 1-888-709-7090. And the good news, evolving with the times, there's a text option.
That's fantastic.
Right? Because as you know, I mean, again, let's see this scenario. I mean, you're in that house. You may only have a moment. You probably can't make a phone call, where you won't be heard. So that text option is there. And I know it certainly has been, people are availing of that service. That's unfortunate, but it's good and it's needed, and I'm happy that that service is there to provide. So that's just one thing that we're doing. But again, multiple organizations, Indigenous women's organizations, Violence Prevention, St. John's Status of Women Council are another great organization, and I have to commend them on the recent project that they've put out, an e-course called Empowering Them, of course, which is so people can log on, you do the training, and it talks about gender-based violence, and there's things that you never really consider unless you sat down and you go through it and you learn, because we take these things for granted, but it teaches people to pick up signs of someone you know or love, your neighbor, your family member, your sister, whomever could be experiencing this, and it teaches ways on how we can support those people and victims. So again, I can't emphasize enough that the people who work at the community stakeholders and in the groups, they're the experts, and I'm grateful that they're there to provide feedback to me on how I can help them and how I can be their voice, of course, at the cabinet table and as well as the government caucus table. So I can't thank them enough, and I really, really admire the work that they do. They're lifesavers in many ways.
I agree with you completely. So we can't talk about women's issues without talking about intersectionality. So when we look at intersectionality in terms of race and diversity, what is your ministry doing to kind of support that when it comes to women's issues?
Well, I'm also happy to say, and I'm honored to be the co-chair of the Gender Roundtable that Premier Fury has put in place. It was one of the first things he did. And there were two meetings. One was virtual, of course, because of COVID. But this past fall, we were able to get together in person. And we had a full day, over at the Holiday Inn here in St. John's, where people from across the province, Newfoundland, Labrador, stakeholders could come, and we could sit, we could have these conversations, have these sessions, and of course, it's solution-based. We're there to identify problems, to brainstorm, to bring that expertise to the table, and identify ways and solutions how we can move forward. And the members again who were at that table. Again, they're the experts. Accessibility issues represented, and groups, of course, Indigenous. And as we know, Indigenous people, women in Labrador in particular, we have the highest rates of violence against Indigenous women in Labrador, across Canada. So that's alarming right there that we have that in our own backyard. Again, there's so much work to do, but there's work being done. I also had the opportunity to attend a gathering out on the West Coast in just before Christmas time. And again, it was the Indigenous Women's Gathering. It was an honor to be invited, and as minister, I went and I went there to listen. And we also had staff, of course, my team from the Department of Women and Gender Equality. We went and we listened, we absorbed, we took it in, and that's what we were there to do. And actually, that report has been presented back to my department just recently. So again, I can't wait to move forward on those initiatives. And of course, we work with our federal, provincial, and territorial partners across the country for the calls of justice. As you know, there were over 230 calls for justice that came out of the National Inquiry. And again, there's a lot of great work to do, very important work to do. Yeah.
So before we clue up, we just want to talk a little bit more about women are typically carrying the voices when it comes to breaking the bias and putting our voices forward. So what do you have to say to our male counterparts to help break the bias and make things more equal when it comes to gender disparities?
Well, it's great. Women are, like you said, they're carrying that torch, and they have been for quite some time. And we can think about trailblazers back through the years, through our history. But men need to support women as well. We need to see that. Men in power in the positions, they need to mentor. They need to support. We need to make sure that these voices are represented at the tables in industry, at tables in government, tables in community, tables in healthcare. Because as we know, we all experience it differently. Women have different experiences. Gender diverse people experience differently. Men have different experiences, through society, through our healthcare, through our education, through our industry. So we just need to make sure that, and we need to keep that checklist. And I encourage everyone on a daily basis, especially if you're in a position of power and authority, make sure you've got women represented. Make sure there's gender diverse people represented. Make sure culture diversity is represented. And at that time too, I don't want to forget a very important group that we work with is the Multicultural Women Organization here in the province. They are a beautiful group. I had the honor to go over and visit with them actually when I first came to the portfolio last spring, and I commend them on the work that they're doing. My government also partners with them, our department, of course, with operational funding. So and you know what, we have arguably the best place in the world to live, and we want to invite people. We want that cultural diversity. We've got one of the best universities, so it's Newfoundland is open for business. Newfoundland Labrador.
Perfect. I want to thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me, especially in light of International Women's Day. And we'll be right back.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
That was a great conversation with Minister Pam Parsons. Remember, we all play a role when it comes to breaking the bias and creating a world with more gender equality. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
This is Rogers TV.
Calling all journalism students. Omni Television is